Okay, so what you see here is the final file for my Cyber Spider Woman. Oh, and you see those red flashes? That's my computer complaining. I try to do quick, simple stuff, but no matter what I do, I always make it more and more and more complex. And there's a lot of stuff going on in this file. And I've got an older computer, and my video card is complaining like heck right now. I got a nice chunk of RAM in here, so that does help. But I need a new computer. I'm just really pushing the limits of what this old thing can do. But she is my cyber spider woman, and basically the idea is she's sort of like a super techno spy. She had some sort of industrial accident or something, I don't know, and she was fitted with all these cyber components, and she can shrink down and slip into your computer systems, and with her heat gun, she can desolder components, and her tail is like an interface device, so she can interface with the computer and steal data and add viruses and just mess up your whole system. And while I was doing this, that flash of red drives me nuts. But I noticed, the bodice I set up. She's supposed to be sort of a sexy slash scary spider gal. So it's really not meant to be armor, right? And she's not fighting with swords. She's a spy. So she sneaks around and so I'm gonna let that go. If she was actually, if she was actually a warrior woman fighting with swords or spears or something, that kind of top would definitely be a problem. But I'm gonna let it go. Okay, now, and if you look over here, you can see how I set up the file, right? Okay, so I got a folder here with all the components for the circuit board. Oof, that was harsh. I think between the screen recorder and the size of the file, it's going to be an issue, but we'll just push on through. Yeah! Okay, and I got one separate one for just the heat gun. And here's the legs. Right now, inside the legs folder, I have all the legs separately. So I can turn each one off and on as needed. And thus save my computer a lot of heartache. Let's turn that off, maybe give it a break. And here's a little test board that I did, but I'll go into that in a minute. Now, I also had originally, when I was working on this, the woman's body was in one folder, and parts of the clothes were in another, and I had all of those separately so I could turn them off and on as needed as I'm working on it, and I could see what was going on. It helped a lot, especially towards the end. The bigger the file gets, the harder they get to work on. I don't know if you can see the beach ball right now. Sometimes the screen recorder gets it, sometimes it doesn't. Slows things way down. It's a real pain in the butt to work on, but you got to work with what you got, and this is what I got. Okay, so let's talk. Let's talk about the circuit board for a second. So, I was a little stumped at how I was going to do this at first. I wanted these traces, the copper paths that the electricity would take between the components, I wanted them to be a copper color. And I wanted the circuit board to be a nice green color, and I didn't want any layer lines or any roughness. I wanted some nice smooth finish. So I wasn't sure how I was going to do this. At first I was thinking of doing a little filament switching where I would print the board, and then when I got to the trace layer I would just print the traces. I would do the components separately and then glue them on. The only problem with that is it would be a super pain to paint all the traces one color and the circuit board another color. It would be really difficult to do that. So how was I going to separate the two? Well, what I ended up doing was I modeled the traces separately. And then printed them out. And then I stuck them all down to a picture of the traces so I could keep track of everything. And I sanded and painted and finished them. and then I sanded, painted, and finished the circuit board separately, and I glued them together. The components were all printed separately. Most of these were printed in one piece. You know, like the capacitors were printed straight up like they were. So these little ICs were printed straight up. The only thing that I changed a little bit, these transistors here, I printed on their backs so that I would get a nice, flat, square part. And I had holes cut in the circuit board so that I could use it as registration to line everything up. And it was a little tedious, but it all worked out really well. I didn't need much glue. None of these parts were really under a lot of pressure. They all just needed to be held in place. You know, nothing really came between the traces. And it all worked out. You know, it was a little bit of work, but it worked out pretty fine. And all of this stuff was modeled using simple box modeling techniques. Everything is, you know, pretty much a box or a cylinder here. Subsurfaced in most cases, although these kind of things are not. These little SMD type resistors, you know, they're all modeled on actual existing parts that I found on the internet. The circuit is nowhere near any kind of realistic functioning circuit. I'm sure anybody who's watching this that's any kind of electronics hobbyist or circuit designer or anything is like looking at like this mess and asking what the heck is it? I just wanted it to sort of resemble a circuit board. I wanted so that if you looked at it, you got the idea. That's a circuit board. And I think that's pretty much what I accomplished. Okay, and here you can see here's an early version of the file. And I do this a lot of the times. I will save iterations as I go along. Like this is woman 5, which, you know, I think at the one point I had separated the Cyber Spider Woman from the circuit board to try to make it easier to work on. Of course, I had to bring it all together to match up the legs to what I was doing, but I saved iterations. Like there's woman 1 through 6 or 7. So as I go, I save as in case something happens, file corruption. I don't. Even a lot of times, it's not even necessarily a file corruption. It's like I changed my mind. I did something. Oh, I don't like that. Well, I got the file before to go back to, and I even have backups. I have 2 external drives that I save everything to, so I can always go back and undo things. And here you see basically how I set up the body. Right, I just make a bunch of parts and I boolean them together. See, there's the rib cage, the shoulders, and I really like doing the hands like this. I do these little rough geometric hands, and then I boolean it all together, and I round it out in sculpt mode, and it comes out really, really well. Right? I did the same thing for the other hand. I can adjust all the fingers. Here, all the fingers are one piece, which is usually how I do them. But in this hand, I guess I was trying something different. All the different joints of the finger are separate pieces. And if you'll notice where the origin point is, it's right at the joint. So if I would hit R to rotate, that's where it'll rotate. So I can kind of open the hand. It was a little awkward, but it was an interesting idea. It worked well enough for this, but I'm not sure as I would do it again. And that's basically how I build up the body. And it's also good because you get a chance to work on the proportions. I think in this particular one, the head was just a little too big and I had to reduce it. And it helps to let me do that, you know, working on it in chunks. Like if I was to sculpt all of this out of one big thing, it would be a little harder to adjust proportions and get things right. Not impossible. Lots of people do it that way. I just prefer to do it this way. All right, and you can see here as well the legs. I joined them in sections right at the joint. right? So that I could use R to rotate. So let's say I were to do this. Set origin to 3D cursor. Now, all the origins for all of that stuff selected goes to that point. And now I can change it there. And if I wanted, I can move that here, right? Deselect that. Set origins to 3D cursor. And now I can move all of that like that. Now, you could also, rig this whole thing up and do it that way. That is definitely a way to go. It just didn't seem worth it to me to do it that way. This way seemed to do well enough, and I could do the same thing with the toes, and it all worked out fairly well. Coming up in the next video, I show you some of the sculpting of this piece, and then, after that, I'm going to go over how I cut this sucker up for printing. So make sure you like, subscribe, and ring, ring, ring my bell. Oh man, I swear I'll never do that again. I don't know what I was thinking.